When you break an arm, the medical field offers you this really clean binary answer.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Broken or not broken.
Right. The x-ray machine hums, it produces this crisp image, and the doctor just points to a jagged white line. It is
Hmm.
a very satisfying, measurable reality.
Hmm.
We love that level of diagnostic clarity, like we crave it. But what happens when the x-ray machine for your own soul is, permanently glitching?
That is a much harder question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens when you try to diagnose your own faith or the motives of your local church or even the actual direction of human history, and all you get is this blurry, warped image?
It's frustrating.
It really is. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is a deep dive where we're looking at a text that, quite frankly, forces us to admit our own staggering ignorance.
Yeah, we have a single massive source text to work through today.
We do. We are unpacking Charles Haddon Spurgeon's sermon titled Now and Then. He delivered this to his congregation in London back in 1871.
Based on the Apostle Paul's letter to the Corinthians.
Right, specifically 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face.
And our mission for you, the listener, is to analyze Spurgeon's framework for how our current, limited earthly understanding of ourselves, the church, God will eventually give way to complete comprehension.
Yeah, we're going to look at what this means for how you process trials, knowledge, and your faith today. So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the rivalry Spurgeon sets up right at the beginning.
The big rivalry.
Right, between two things we usually assume go hand in hand, which are knowledge and love.
Yeah, to understand this rivalry, we really have to transport ourselves to the environment Paul was writing to, and then, look at the environment Spurgeon was preaching in.
Let's do it.
So Corinth was a booming economic hub in the ancient world. It was this highly competitive, status-obsessed city.
Sort of like a modern metropolis.
Spot on. And when you brought people from that culture into a newly formed church, they naturally imported their worldly metrics for success.
Yeah, they couldn't just leave that at the door.
No, they turned spiritual gifts into basically corporate key performance indicators.
Oh, wow. KPIs for the church.
Yeah. The ability to speak in different tongues or prophecy or, the skill to teach brilliantly, those became status symbols.
Because they were measuring people by their intellectual or supernatural output?
Precisely. And spiritual gifts were distributed unevenly by design, meant for temporary earthly use to equip individuals for specific tasks.
But human nature twisted those differing abilities into a hierarchy.
Yeah, creating rampant jealousy.
Which is a very human psychological instinct, I think. We naturally gravitate toward things we can quantify.
Oh, for sure. We love a spreadsheet.
Right. You can count how many languages someone speaks. You can measure the eloquence of a sermon. But you can't easily quantify love.
No, you can't.
So the Corinthians were building this hierarchy based on measurable output and completely sidelining the invisible virtues.
And Paul steps into this chaotic dynamic and says, look, you are prioritizing the wrong metric entirely.
He elevates charity.
He elevates charity, or love, way above these specific localized gifts. Spurgeon notes that while gifts are distributed like specialized tools for specific jobs, love belongs to all believers.
It's the universal mark.
Yeah, it's the mark of someone who has passed from death unto life. Love is personal.
Spurgeon describes it as a light in the heart, right?
A light in the heart and the star in the breast. While spiritual gifts will eventually cease because their temporary function will end, love thrives at all times and in all places, living eternally.
Spurgeon uses a fantastic analogy here to explain the relationship between these gifts and love.
Oh, the artist one.
Yeah, he compares the believer to an artist. He says an artist wants to have deft limbs. You want your hands to be steady, your fingers to be nimble, your senses to be sharp.
You need the technical skill.
Right. Those physical attributes are like the spiritual gifts. They are incredibly useful for getting the work done. But love is the pure taste, the secret spring living and breathing within the artist.
Because that inner faculty is what actually prompts the skill.
Yeah, you can have the best, most steady hands in the world. But if you lack that inner artistic vision, that pure taste, you're just painting by numbers. You aren't creating art.
And this is where Spurgeon bridges the ancient world to the 19th century. And honestly, it translates perfectly to our time today.
How so?
Spurgeon looks around at his own culture and points out that in the academies of Greece and in modern schools, knowledge takes all the prizes.
Yeah, the smartest guy in the room wins.
Always. He mentions Dr. Arnold, the famous headmaster of rugby school, and notes how much of Dr. Arnold's success as a schoolmaster was due to the honor he gave to a good boy. in preference to a clever boy.
Oh, that's interesting.
But in our modern systems, being the clever boy is everything.
Being the clever boy gets you the scholarships.
It gets you the promotions, the platform. We have a psychology of metric fixation. We reward the visible intellect.
But in the church, prioritizing the clever boy over the good boy creates disastrous rivalries.
Right. And love acts as the great equalizer there. It doesn't matter if your talents are few and your intellectual capacity is average. If the love of Christ dwells in you richly, you possess the superior grace.
I want to push back on Paul's hierarchy here on behalf of the listener, though.
Okay, lay it on me.
We live in an era where acquiring information is our primary currency. Like, we pride ourselves on being well-informed. People listen to audio programs like this, deep dives, specifically to gain knowledge.
That's true.
So, is our drive to acquire information actually a trap if it lacks this element of charity? Are we just recreating the Corinthian problem with modern technology?
That raises a really critical question about the nature of the knowledge we're acquiring. Paul isn't against knowledge inherently.
Right, he was brilliant himself.
Yeah, but he understands its limits in our current state. If earthly knowledge is secondary to love, it's largely because our current knowledge is remarkably flawed, partial, and honestly juvenile.
It's incomplete.
Very. Our drive to be well-informed becomes a trap when we mistake our accumulation of facts for complete reality. We start thinking we possess the whole picture, which breeds arrogance instead of charity.
So true.
But when we realize our knowledge is just a tiny fraction of the truth, charity becomes the only logical response to our shared ignorance. If we all only have a piece of the puzzle, we have to cooperate.
Which requires love.
Exactly.
That leads directly into Spurgeon's metaphor of childhood, which I find incredibly disarming.
Oh, it really is.
Because, like we said, Paul was arguably the foremost intellect of his day in the Christian church. A Pharisee of Pharisees, trained under Gamaliel, he had massive influence. Yet he pauses to reflect on his own infancy.
Yeah, he says, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child.
Spurgeon pauses on this reflection and points out how beneficial it is for us to recall our own humble beginnings.
Why does he say that?
Because forgetting that we were once entirely dependent, ignorant children causes our sympathies to dry up.
Oh, we get rigid.
Yeah, we become churlish. Our opinions get overbearing. We become repulsive in our selfishness, Spurgeon says.
Paul could have leaned on his authority, his office, his visions, his academic training.
But he chooses to look back at his infancy to ground himself. He compares the two stages of his natural life, and it acts as a parable for his spiritual life.
So he feels himself to be, spiritually speaking, in his infancy right now.
Yes. His maturity, his thorough manhood, lies ahead of him in future state. He imagines a future where he looks back on his present self as a beginner, just groping his way amidst the shadows of his own fancy.
And that brings us to the famous phrase, right? For now we see through a glass darkly.
Right. And when we hear glass, we naturally think of our clear, pristine bathroom mirrors, or perfectly transparent window pane.
But that is not the historical context Paul or Spurgeon had in mind.
Not at all. Spurgeon clarifies that ancient glass manufacturing was incredibly primitive compared to what we have today.
The glass used in Roman times, and even common glass in the 19th century, was full of impurities.
It was thick, dull, often tinted green or brown.
Filled with bubbles.
Yeah, imagine trying to identify the specific features of a landscape by looking through the thick, warped bottom of a green glass bottle.
You know there are trees. You know there is a sky.
No.
But the details are distorted.
There is a vast difference between viewing an object through that obscure medium and closely inspecting it with the naked eye.
What's fascinating here is how Spurgeon takes the word darkly and explains that the Greek literally translates to seeing in a riddle.
The riddle.
Yeah, he says, so weak are our perceptions of mind that plain truths often puzzle us.
Wow.
The words that teach us are just pictures that need explanation. The thoughts that stir us are just visions floating in our brains that want rectifying.
So the limitation isn't in the revelation itself.
No, God's revelation is ample and vast. The limitation is entirely in our own nearsightedness and our shallow understanding.
We're experiencing the cognitive dissonance of trying to process infinite truth with finite, flawed equipment.
That's a great way to put it. We are looking at a highly complex reality through a blurry lens, and our brains struggle to make sense of the shapes.
So what happens to all the theological frameworks, the arguments, the things we value so highly right now when we finally grow up?
Spurgeon makes a striking assertion here. He says that in our spiritual adulthood in heaven, we will discard many things we currently count as precious.
Like what?
Well, think of a grown man discarding the toys of his childhood. When you were 5, a particular toy was the most valuable thing in your world.
You'd fight over it, cry over it, protect it.
Right, but when you're 30, you recognize it was just painted wood or plastic. In the same way, much of what we pride ourselves on knowing now, much of our intellectual treasure, will be set aside because we will have access to the unclouded reality.
The shadow gives way to the substance.
Exactly.
It's like looking at your high school debate notes. At the time, you thought you had solved the world's geopolitical issues.
You were utterly confident.
Completely. And now, decades later, you read them and just cringe at your own overconfidence. You realize you were working with a tiny fraction of the data.
That is precisely what Spurgeon is saying about our current theological and spiritual knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. We have this thick, dull, bottle-like glass. We are looking through it right now. What specific things are we looking at that will eventually come into sharp focus?
Well, Spurgeon says the very first thing we see now, but we'll see perfectly then, is surprisingly our own reflection.
Ourselves.
Yeah. He says seeing ourselves is one of the first steps in true religion. He immediately draws a contrast between how the mass of humanity sees themselves and how the believer sees themselves.
Okay, how does the mass of men see themselves?
Spurgeon argues they have never truly seen themselves. They see a flattering facsimile.
A projection.
Yeah, a projection created by their own ego, tailored to hide their flaws and amplify their virtues. It's an edited, filtered image designed to protect their pride.
Like an Instagram filter for the soul.
Right, but by contrast, the person whose eyes have been enlightened by the Holy Spirit sees their ruin. They bemoan themselves on account of the fall. They are made conscious of their own natural depravity.
He says the believer is ground to the very dust by the discovery of their actual sinfulness. They recognize their emptiness.
And Spurgeon argues this is actually a highly profitable thing.
Why is it profitable to feel empty?
Because discovering your emptiness is the essential first step toward receiving divine fullness. Discovering your weakness is the prerequisite for participating in divine strength.
But even with this enlightened view, Spurgeon says we still do not fully see ourselves clearly right now, do we?
No, we don't. In heaven, we will understand the desperate mischief of the fall in a way that would probably crush us today.
Oh, wow.
We'll see the true blackness of sin and understand its hellish desert. We'll look down from that starry height and realize just how fast we were stuck in the miry clay, to use the biblical imagery.
We'll comprehend the absolute totality of our own depravity in ways our current minds suppress just to function daily.
Yeah, but it's not just a realization of how bad things were. There's a bright side.
The flip side of that coin is a glorious self-discovery regarding our redemption.
Yes. When the believer sings, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slain," they will look at their robes washed in that blood and see how incredibly white they are.
They will understand the crimson stains of their past and the immense value of the blood that effaced those spots.
But even more than that, they will fully grasp their adoption. Right now, believers feel the spirit of sonship. They cry, "Abba, Father." But in the future, they will understand fully what it means to be joint heirs with Christ.
Let's pause on that term, joint heirs, because it sounds like nice theological poetry to modern ears, but Paul was writing to an audience who understood Roman law.
Exactly. When Paul and Spurgeon talk about adoption, they are leaning on the legal weight of Roman adoption laws.
The patria potestas.
Right. In that legal system, the father had absolute life-or-death control over his household. When an adult was adopted into a new family, it was a massive legal proceeding called adrogatio.
And it changed everything for them.
Everything. The person's previous debts were completely legally canceled. They were given a new name, a new legal identity, and they became a full, legally binding heir to the new father's estate, entirely equal to any biological children.
It was an ironclad transfer of status.
So when believers are called joint heirs with Christ, it is not a metaphor. It is a legal reality in the divine courtroom. They will see the estates that belong to them. They will understand the mystical marriage bond that knits the soul to Christ, seeing how vital and real that union is, like a branch springing from a stem.
Spurgeon uses this beautiful imagery of the robe of righteousness. He says that right now we know we are covered by it, but then we will actually discern how lustrous it is.
Decked with needlework and wrought gold.
Yeah, far better than the pearls and gems of earthly monarchs. So, we will see ourselves clearly, the depth of our ruin and the staggering height of our redemption.
That's the first thing.
But the second thing Spurgeon points to is our view of the church. And right now, our view of the church is definitely through that thick, bubbled glass.
Oh, for sure.
If our internal mirror is that warped, It completely destabilizes how we look at the people sitting next to us in the pews. If I can't accurately judge my own soul, how am I constantly judging theirs?
Well, currently the church is scattered. We believe there's a chosen people, but they are spread across the globe. And Spurgeon is very honest here.
He is.
He says the church is filled with many people we might not even like if we knew them personally.
We've all met a few of those.
Yeah. They have strange views, odd habits, and outward characteristics that might grate on us. Yet they are moved with one life, quickened with one spirit, redeemed with one blood.
We feel attachment to them for the sake of Jesus Christ, who has married the church as the bride.
But when we get to heaven, the population of the church is going to be a massive shock to our systems.
How so?
Spurgeon says we will know more of the numbers of the chosen, and it will be to our intense surprise. This is a crucial point for how we evaluate our own discernment.
Okay, unpack that.
He highlights that we will miss some people in heaven whom we confidently assumed were perfectly secure.
Like who?
He uses the examples of Judas and Demas. Judas walked with the apostles, managed their finances, and looked the part. Demas was a fellow worker with Paul before abandoning him,
These people blended in perfectly with the saints on earth.
and their absence will shock us. Conversely, we will find some among the elect whom we, in our bitterness of spirit, had completely condemned.
So people we had written off entirely.
Yeah, people that our earthly theological camps or personal prejudices had said, no way they are in.
Okay, if our processes of discernment fail us so spectacularly, how is a local church supposed to maintain any standards or boundaries at all? Doesn't this just lead to theological anarchy?
That's a fair question.
If we can't tell who the modern Judases or Demases are, why even have church membership?
That is the tension we live in. We are called to maintain boundaries based on visible fruit and clear confessions of faith. The church must exercise discipline based on what is visible to preserve its witness. But Spurgeon is cautioning against internal arrogance. It mandates humility. Acknowledging that we are looking through a glass darkly regarding the final state of other people's souls should stop us from acting as the final judge and jury over our neighbors.
It changes our posture.
It means we should be far more generous in our assumptions and far less hasty in our condemnations. We must recognize that the Lord knows those who are His, and our job is to love and extend charity.
While leaving the final sorting of the wheat from the weeds to the ultimate judge.
Right. Our vision is simply too clouded for that final sorting work.
That completely reorients how we participate in a local congregation. It forces a radical grace.
It does.
So we move from seeing ourselves to seeing the individuals in the church. And then Spurgeon zooms out even further. He shifts the focus outward to the chaotic events of the world, asking how God manages it all.
He moves to the providence of God.
And this might be the area where our earthly vision is the most obscured.
Currently, believing that all things work together for good is a matter of faith, not sight. We can sometimes see how things work out well in retrospect, but largely, we cannot tell how every bark and bending line meets in the center of God's love.
We don't perceive how dark dispensations of trials and afflictions actually subserve God's glory and our lasting happiness.
No, we really don't.
Spurgeon has an analogy here that I think is incredibly relevant. He calls it the black envelope.
Oh, this is brilliant.
He says, sometimes a person refuses a letter at the door because the envelope looks ominous. It looks black, it looks like bad news. But it happens that there is something incredibly valuable inside.
Like a massive check.
Yeah. God often sends us a massive amount of mercy inside the black envelope of trial. Spurgeon is basically saying we spend half our prayer lives begging God to return to send her the exact packages we need to survive.
Wow.
We see the black envelope of a job loss, a medical diagnosis, or a financial collapse, and we treat it as an attack. We want it gone.
Because it looks black.
Right. But inside that terrifying envelope is the exact mechanism God is using to kill our pride, or to move us to a place where we are entirely dependent on Him. Because it looks black, we shut our door against it, we pray against it, we fret over it.
And this applies on both a micro and a macro level. On the micro level, in our individual lives, we will review our history in heaven and realize we prayed desperately against the exact circumstances that were best for us.
We will see that the thing we fretted and troubled ourselves over was the richest mercy the Lord ever sent.
And on the macro level, Spurgeon connects this to the history of the world. He suggests that devastating wars, Pestilences that fill graves and earthquakes that make cities tremble are actually necessary cogs in the great wheel of divine machinery.
Wait, wars and pestilences as necessary cogs? How do we reconcile the horrors of human history with the concept of a loving God steering the ship?
It is really counterintuitive to our earthly minds, but Spurgeon is asserting the absolute sovereignty of God here, leaning heavily on the understanding of primary and secondary causes.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
God is the primary cause, steering all of human history toward his designated conclusion, even while human beings and natural disasters act as secondary causes. He who sits upon the throne rules supremely over every creature in heaven, earth, or hell.
So nothing is outside of his control.
Nothing. In the future state, God will make it manifest to us that his government was right. Every part and portion will be seen to work together with a unity of design.
Which is a massive comfort, especially in times when earthly government systems feel like they are loosening or failing entirely.
Oh, especially then. It reminds the believer that the government is upon his shoulder, and it must come out right in the long run.
So we will see the machinery of providence face to face. We will see that all the dark and bending lines actually made a perfect circle.
Yeah.
But moving from earthly trials to heavenly truths, Spurgeon notes that if our view of daily events is obscured, our grasp on high theology is even weaker.
It is.
This brings us to the ultimate visions: doctrines, Christ, and God himself.
Spurgeon points out that while believers love the grand doctrines of the faith, our understanding is simply too feeble to grasp them fully.
We account them to be mysteries.
Right. We reverently acknowledge them, but we dare not attempt to explain them perfectly. We see things in a mist.
He quotes the biblical story of the blind man gaining his sight in stages.
Yeah, the man says he saw men as trees walking.
That's our theology right now.
Exactly. We see a doctrine here and a doctrine there, and we are often completely at a loss to figure out how one part harmonizes with another part of the same system. We cannot untie the knots.
Like, how does absolute divine sovereignty harmonize with human responsibility?
Right, it's a knot we cannot fully untie with our current mental capacity.
And here's where Spurgeon uses a bit of humor, which I appreciate. He says he has fancied sometimes that the elucidations of the most learned doctors of divinity on earth—
The guys writing the massive textbooks?
Right, the theologians, the men who drafted the most complex confessions. If those writings could be submitted to the very least person in the kingdom of heaven, it would only cause them to smile.
They would smile at the learned ignorance of the sons of earth.
Because in heaven, things that puzzle us here will be as plain as the alphabet. We will not need textbooks because we will have the reality right in front of us.
And that humorous image sets up the transition to the most serious and awe-inspiring point of the entire text: seeing Jesus Christ physically.
Yes.
Spurgeon contrasts our current view of Christ by faith with the future literal presence. Currently, we see him through the lattice, through the ordinances of the house, like the Lord's Supper.
We see enough to know he is altogether lovely, but it's just a report.
He uses the story of the Queen of Sheba visiting King Solomon.
I love this analogy.
She heard all the rumors of his wisdom and wealth. She was highly skeptical, assuming the reports were exaggerated. But when she actually arrived at his court in Jerusalem and saw the architecture, the seating of his officials, and the wisdom he possessed with her own eyes, she declared that the half had not been told her.
Spurgeon says, whatever we have experienced of Christ on earth is just the rumor of the Queen of Sheba. The reality will be entirely different.
And Spurgeon gets specific about this physical reality. He speaks of the joy of seeing the feet that were nailed, touching the hand that was pierced, and looking upon the head that wore the thorns.
It's the physical, bodily presence of the resurrected King.
He says the streets of gold will have small attraction, and the harps of angels will barely enchant us compared to seeing the King in the midst of the throne. The physical presence of the mediator is the focal point of heaven.
But then he pushes into the really deep things. He says, beyond a doubt, we shall also see God.
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. How is that possible? Mechanically speaking, we are finite creatures. How can a finite creature see the infinite creator?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where we touch the very edges of our theological capacity. Spurgeon acknowledges that no creature will ever be omniscient.
We'll never comprehend all the thoughts of the Creator.
The finite can never contain the infinite. However, it is written that the pure in heart shall see God. This is often referred to historically as the beatific vision.
Right.
In heaven, God's immediate dwelling in the midst of the New Jerusalem is its peerless glory. His presence is the literal light of the city, We will understand more of God than we do now, come nearer to him, be more familiar with him.
Spurgeon says he cowers before the thought while he revels in it. He recounts how he has strained his eyes looking at nature to try to see God's handiwork, listen to the voice of conscience, and heard the gospel, almost seeing God incarnate in Jesus.
But to see God directly.
He admits, what that means or what it is, me, I cannot tell. It is a beautiful admission of the limits of his own intellect.
It really is.
Which leads me to ask, if we are so limited now, how will this drastic shift in our perception actually happen? Like, what are the actual mechanics of this shift from seeing through a glass darkly to seeing face to face?
Well, Spurgeon offers a few vital suggestions for how this change is effected. The first is a change in our actual constitution.
Our bodies.
Yeah. He explains that the revelation we have right now suits us as men and women clad in poor mortal bodies. But the revelation in heaven will suit us as immortal spirits, raised from the dead with immortal spiritual bodies.
So our hardware, so to speak, will be upgraded to handle the new software of heavenly revelation.
Exactly. A mortal body is subject to decay, fatigue, and neurological limits. A glorified body is built for an entirely different spectrum of existence.
But it's not just our bodies, it's our location. He gives this incredible astronomy analogy.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts.
He says, for ages, astronomers on Earth thought planets were retrograde, going backward, or standing still. The orbits made no sense.
Right. This is a reference to Ptolemaic astronomy, which placed the Earth at the center of the universe. When ancient astronomers looked up at the planets, particularly Mars, the orbits seemed illogical.
Mars would move forward across the sky, then seem to stop, go backward, and then move forward again.
They called it retrograde motion. And to explain it, they had to invent these incredibly messy mathematical concepts called epicycles, circles within circles.
The math was chaotic because they were observing from the wrong center.
But then Copernicus comes along and places the sun at the center of the model.
Right. Once you stand in the sun, mathematically speaking, you see that the planets are moving in perfect, elegant ellipses.
And right now, we are standing on the Earth, looking at the providence of God, and it looks like it is going backward. It looks chaotic.
We try to invent spiritual epicycles to explain why bad things are happening.
Yes, heaven places us at the center, near God's throne. When we get to the fountainhead, the center of all things, the machinery of providence will become entirely clear because our vantage point has been corrected.
We will see the elegant ellipses of God's sovereign plan.
We will.
That reframes the entire concept of our confusion. But then Spurgeon talks about capacity, and this might be the most practical insight for how we view our current limitations. Why don't we have this complete knowledge right now? Why the thick glass?
Spurgeon argues that our current organs and mental faculties are properly adapted for our current moral requirements. It is a matter of capacity.
Okay, give me an example.
He says, we might wish we had better ears, able to hear 10 miles away, but if we did, the sounds would drown each other out and deafen us. We might wish for sharper sight, but it would not be useful.
We have a psychological concept today called cognitive overload. If you present a human brain with too much data, too many tasks, or too much sensory input all at once, the system shuts down. It freezes.
Our souls operate with a similar limitation. He applies this directly to our spiritual capacity. He says, if we knew more of our own sinfulness right now, we might be driven to absolute despair.
We couldn't handle the truth.
No, we couldn't. If we knew more of God's glory right now, we might literally die of terror. If we had more understanding without the equivalent moral capacity to employ it, we would be filled with conceit and tormented with ambition.
Why would seeing God's glory terrify us right now? Compare the human soul's current hardware to a 1990s computer trying to process a petabyte of modern data. It would simply crash.
Our current ignorance is an act of divine protection. We cannot drink the wine of the kingdom right now. It is too strong for us. It would intoxicate us with pride or stagger us with passion.
So in the future state, our minds and systems will be strengthened to receive more without the damage that would come to us here from overleaping our divinely regulated boundaries.
Our capacity will finally match the revelation.
So we complain about the thick glass, we complain about the muddy waters, but God is essentially giving us sunglasses so we do not burn our retinas staring at the sun.
That's a great way to think about it.
Our ignorance is a shield. That completely changes how I feel about the things I do not understand. Which brings us to the final section of our deep dive, the practical lessons for the now.
Because understanding this future reality shouldn't just make us sit around daydreaming.
Right, it demands immediate practical changes in how we live today.
Spurgeon draws out 3 distinct practical applications. The first is gratitude. Instead of complaining about what we cannot see, we must be thankful that we can see even a little bit.
He compares the believer to someone born blind who has been granted some sight.
Even if you only see men as trees walking, the fact that you are no longer entirely blind to your own sin and God's grace is a miracle.
The natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God. So the mere fact that you possess any spiritual sight should produce immense gratitude.
The second lesson is hopefulness. This vision is coming soon. As Spurgeon notes, it may be just a day or two hence. Betwixt us and heaven, there may be but a single step.
But the third lesson is where the rubber really meets the road for us in our daily interactions. It is the lesson of forbearance.
Forbearance. Especially in our theological debates and our interactions with other believers, Spurgeon uses a brilliant illustration here.
The two men in the dark.
Yes, he pictures two people standing in a pitch-black room, wrangling over the color of an object. One says it is blue, the other says it is green. They're getting angry, the debate is getting heated.
Someone brings in a few dim candles to help, but the candlelight distorts the color even more.
Spurgeon says, bringing in candles will not solve the dispute. What do they have to do? They must wait for the morning sun.
They must wait for the morning sun. What a picture of our current theological arguments. Spurgeon says our disputes are often childish. We are wasting time arguing while we're sailing on a dangerous, rough sea.
The winds are high. The focus should be on managing the ship, keeping the sails in good order, and avoiding the quicksands.
We have to leave some questions in abeyance until we reach the fair haven.
When we reach the fair haven and talk with those bright spirits before the throne, Spurgeon suggests we will confess the mistakes we made and rejoice in the light we receive.
We will look back at our bitter earthly debates and realize how foolish we were to fight over colors in the dark.
It is a massive call to soften the asperity of our debates and practice Christian forbearance. We must tolerate differing opinions on secondary issues because we recognize the thick glass we are all looking through.
The final lesson Spurgeon offers is one of aspiration. He compares earth to a school for children. We are learning the basics. But heaven is the great university where we finally take our degree. Therefore, fearing death is completely illogical for the believer.
He addresses the fear of death head on. Many believers shudder at the thought of death, dreading to enter the gate. But Spurgeon points out that there is no pain in dying. The pain is in living.
When we leave off living here, we have done with pain. Death is merely, or rather, death is simply the conclusion of that pain.
Exactly.
I absolutely love this phrase from the text. The man that is afraid of dying ought to be afraid of living. Let's unpack that. It sounds almost paradoxical, but it makes perfect sense.
It really does.
Living in this broken world with these mortal bodies, dealing with the thick glass, the muddy waters, the black envelopes of trial, that is where the pain is. Death is the mechanism that graduates us from the school of pain into the university of light.
We're blaming the exit door for the discomfort of the waiting room.
If we truly believe that we are moving from partial, childish knowledge to a state where we will know even as we are known,
If we truly believe we are moving from seeing a scattered, flawed church to a unified, perfected assembly,
if we believe we will move from questioning providence to seeing its perfect machinery, then our posture should be one of eager aspiration, combined with a patient, loving endurance of our current limitations.
So, to bring all these threads together, we started with the rivalry between knowledge and love, realizing that because our earthly knowledge is so limited, like looking through the bottom of a thick green bottle, love is the only logical grace to prioritize.
We learned that discarding our current intellectual pride is like a man putting away his childhood toys. We saw that in the future, we will finally see the true depth of our ruin and the staggering height of our redemption.
We also confronted the shocking reality that heaven's population will surprise us, humbling our earthly discernment. We saw that the black envelopes of trial we receive are actually necessary cogs in a perfect divine machinery that we can only understand when we change our vantage point from earth to the center of God's throne.
And perhaps most comfortingly, we realize that our current inability to fully grasp these mysteries is a feature, not a bug. Our limited capacity is a divine shield, protecting us from being overwhelmed by despair or terror.
We're wearing sunglasses until our immortal bodies are ready for the blazing noon of God's presence.
Which leaves us with a mandate for how we live the now in light of the then. With gratitude for the sight we have, with hope for the clarity to come, and with immense forbearance for the people we were sailing with in the dark.
Well said.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. Something for you to ponder long after this audio stops. Think about the sharpest disagreement you currently have with someone over a deeply held belief. Maybe it is a theological debate, maybe it is a judgment you have made about their character. If you are both just standing in a pitch black room arguing over a color that you cannot possibly see clearly yet, wait, not an ellipsis, if you are arguing over a color you can't possibly see clearly yet, how does anticipating the sunrise tomorrow change the way you speak to them today? Thank you for joining this deep dive on Reformed thinking. Keep questioning, keep listening, and we will catch you next time.